Hi, everybody. Welcome to the book club. This is our February edition, and we could not be more excited about our book day and our presenter. Before we get to the actual meeting, we're going to go through a couple of announcements like we always do. But first, we're going to read our mission statement, and we have our good friend book club member, David, who's going to read that.
The Good Book Club was created to bring together nuanced Mormons, post-Mormons, and others with a shared interest in Mormonism. We are introspective, critical thinkers seeking to learn, connect, and build relationships through the catalyst of literature. We welcome all who are searching for a safe space to share authentic thoughts, feelings, and ideas through open dialogue and shared experiences relative to Mormon culture. As we deconstruct previous beliefs, we encourage all to find happiness in the process of discovering new religious ideologies, spirituality, and life philosophies.
Oh, that just sounds so good when you did. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So, I also forgot to add at the top of the show that let's all try to keep our mics muted so there's not any ambient noise while we're listening, and of course, unmute when you want to make a comment. The Good Book Club went to a book signing of a new book. I have it right here, American Zion by Benjamin Park. And we are going to be interviewing him on Mormonish. And I think I'll throw this out to the book club as extra reading because this is really good. It's just kind of history of Mormonism. And Benjamin Park, he wrote Kingdom of Nauvoo. So I'll know he does an amazing job. So pick yourself up a copy. This is an awesome read for extra bonus material for the book club. Let's see, what else do we have coming up? Okay, finally, our episode with Moshe Quinn, who is the son of D. Michael Quinn, where we discuss the chosen path on the Mormon Stories Book Club, is going to air on Valentine's Day for some reason at 10 a.m. We taped it a while ago. It was supposed to be a live episode, but some things happened at the Mormon Story Studio that it's going to be coming out on February 14th at 10 a.m. So just pop onto Mormon Story and you'll be able to see our interview. There's a picture there. Barbara Brown, who is the CEO of Signature Book, and she also edited and annotated this book. This is a really good book. I keep telling you guys this, but it is really amazing, like a fly on the wall of the workings of the church for those decades, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to the 2000s. A lot of really interesting information in here through the eyes of Michael Quinn. So can't recommend this one enough either. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, yes. The next book coming up in the Mormon Stories Book Club, which I helped John DeLynn run, is Uncultured. This is the story of someone who survived the Children of God cult in Brazil. So I'm not sure of the date yet, but if you want to grab a copy and start reading, we're going to have a live interview with her. I'm guessing the end of February, maybe beginning of March. So I've just started this and it's really fascinating. There's also a couple documentaries online. Trying to think, I think maybe on Netflix about the Children of God cult. Really, really fascinating stuff. So that's coming up. Let's see what else we have. Oh, I do not have this book yet because it doesn't come out till the 18th of February, but it is called The Devil Sat on My Bed. Landon and I got to interview the wonderful author, Dr. Stiles, Erin, as we call her, about this book where she just talks about how it's so baked into Mormonism. This, I saw my dead ancestor, spirit visited me. Really interesting book, and our discussion was really interesting with her, and we'll be doing that on Mormonish podcast probably in the next 2 weeks. So this is coming out on the 8th if anybody is interested in getting a copy of that. And then, of course, Letting Go. And I highly recommend this. And we are going to have Lisa on. Oh, my goodness. We've been trying to do this Christmas time. So we're going to have her on to talk about the book, too, on Mormonish podcast. So it's a good book. Grab a copy. Lisa's fantastic. And I can't recommend this one enough either. Another thing that we want to bring everyone's attention to is Thrive. It is in March 1st through 3rd. This is where you can see the speakers there. We're going to have John and Bill, Natasha. Is Natasha there? No, Lindsay Hansen Park, Anthony Miller, lots of people. I know lots of people are going down for this. You can look at thrivebeyondreligion.org to try to get more information, but this is happening in less than a month in the area for those of you that are around. And I think Bruce is coming down for this, which is really fun. So that's awesome. Our next book coming up in March, and we're going to have Len, who our presenter, give us more of a detailed preview at the end of today's book club, but it's Devil's Gate. And this is the story of the Willie Martin Handcart Company, the true story. So this is a really great book. I haven't started it yet, but a lot of people told them this is the next book, said I've already read it, or this is amazing. So we are really looking forward to this and putting together a field trip where we go to Wyoming. Not this time of year, that's not good, but maybe later in the spring or summer. So all right, I think that brings us to the beginning of our book club episode today, where we will be discussing Sex at Dawn, and we have the amazing Shauna as our presenter. So take it away, Shauna.
Okay. Let's see. I want to share my screen. And first, let's get this out of the way. I apologize for the AI. I just wanted to follow Rebecca's share. See, now I'm already losing it. Example and go with some AI stuff. Let me get this out of the way. I will do my best. Anyway, I will not. I'm nervous. Sorry. Okay, everybody can hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, we're good. Okay, so Sex at Dawn argues against the prevailing belief that humans are inherently monogamous creatures. The book proposes that monogamy is a relatively recent development and not necessarily aligned with our biological nature. It suggests that the advent of agriculture and the institution of private property plays a pivotal role in shaping our modern conception of monogamy. The authors argue that the shift from a nomadic, egalitarian existence to a settled hierarchical society led to the emergence of possessiveness, jealousy, and the need to control sexual behavior. The book has generated controversy and sparks discussion among both scholars and the general public. Critics argue that the author's argument is overly simplistic or flawed and claim that they cherry-pick evidence to support their perspective. One of my biggest criticisms is that the subtitle, What It Means for Modern Relationship, is not really addressed in the book. At least that was my takeaway. I did not come away with a clear understanding of what to think about the data presented. Where are the suggestions for what to do with the information? Where do we go from here? So what were your initial thoughts, if you want to share any, or criticisms of the book? Does anybody have any? Oh, Bruce.
Well, yeah, again, this kind of goes with everything about the book club. We were raised in a culture that had very defined sexual rules, though those have changed dramatically over the last 100 and some years, from polygamy and stuff. But in deconstructing our religious background, the book club serves as one of my resources is to figure out how the world works. You know, we read Who We Are and How We Got Here, David Reich from the Harvard Genetics Lab. We read Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. And just trying to figure out how does the world work? Well, this book kind of goes like, okay, so the, narrative that we grew up with about, you go on your mission to get married as soon as you can, you have as many kids as you can, you stay married and stuff may not be the most natural thing. And the Mormon Church's obsession with masturbation and things sexual. So it just kind of adds a little bit to my view that the world isn't the way that I was taught how it works. And this gives me a little bit more insight into how the world may work. So that's just my comment.
Thanks. Yvonne?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So yeah, just echoing Bruce, a quote from the book that said, we all have a psychological tendency to view our own experience as standard. We all know that. One of the things I shared a lot of these my insights with my husband Charlie, who didn't read the book, but and I thought it had a lot of data, right? I mean, it had a lot of experiences and stuff, but he said, well, he suggested I look for some counter stuff. And there was, somebody did write a refutation of the book called Sex at Dusk. I don't know if any of you came across that, but my takeaway was really positive from the whole book, in that once you kind of start deconstructing that the way you have looked at things, the way you looked at things that Homo sapiens have been progressing, and from base apes or whatever, if you believe in evolution, to higher and higher and more moral people, and just that paradigm breaks down. I think it's kind of freeing in a way. And Shauna, your criticism that he does address like what next, that's valid, but I wanted to read this paragraph because to me it summarized what he was saying in the book, and it's on page 109 of the book, and it's, could it be that the atomic isolation of the husband-wife nucleus with an orbiting child or two, I just love his metaphor in there, is in fact a culturally imposed aberration of our species, as ill-suited to our evolved tendencies as corsets, chastity belts, and suits of armor? Dare we ask whether mothers, fathers, and children are all being shoehorned into a family structure that suits none of us? And he does spend a lot of time in the first chapter of going through all the ways that serial monogamy, as he calls it, has failed us, with all the divorce rate and even the parental, the resentment of children. So, and I'm not willing to say that monogamy is not the way to go, but maybe it is the way for some people, right? I mean, I love to listen to Natasha Helfer Parker when she talks about sexuality, because she makes it so normal. If you're 0 to 10 on the scale, if you're a 1 or a 2, that's fine. If you're a 10 and hypersexual, that's okay. But certainly we need to educate ourselves, and especially, I'm looking at my grandchildren now because my children have all grown and everything, but we need to educate ourselves, right? And that's what this book tries to do.
Thank you. Landon?
Yeah, the thing I really liked about the book was it showed me how sexuality tends to track the culture so much of the time. It was, they pointed out, I really thought it was cool when they talked about the hunter-gatherers, and how when you have a hunter-gatherer village, you share everything. You share your food, you share protection, you share the hunt, you share the, all the parties or whatever you want to call them, the rituals, everything is shared. So it only made sense that you would share those other things. And I know that was a thing when Lewis and Clark got up to the, I can't remember the name of the tribe, but up in North Dakota, when they got up there heading west, that they stayed the winter with the tribe, and that's exactly what happened. They just shared. All the natives came out and said, "Oh, take our wives and go," because they believed that the white mixing the white people would help strengthen the children. So it was kind of the same concept that I saw in this book. So I thought that was quite fascinating to see how a hunter-gatherer society that shares everything, that you would share that. And then it also made sense from child rearing that, when you're in a culture where people die and can die very young, it's going to be very often that the father's going to die of a disease or of an injury, and the kid is taken care of because he has multiple fathers, or vice versa for mothers. They have multiple mothers that raise them in the village. So the village raises the child as opposed to a person. And that made sense to me in that type. And then when you get to the agricultural society, you see how monogamy and property rights influenced it. And it's the same way with the Mormon church. You saw the polygamy comes in, and why did people accept it? Well, because it was the culture. It was culturally acceptable. So it seems like, it's really that sexuality is really just a reflection of what's acceptable from society. I kind of saw that, it doesn't have to be one way. It's whatever the culture decides can work for that culture and shouldn't be looked at bad or good. It's just how they do it.
Yeah, thanks, Landon. We actually are going to go into the hunter-gatherer versus agricultural revolution later. So thank you for your thoughts on that. David and Bruce, and then we'll move on.
Pretty much echoing what Landon had said. Everything was to be shared in common. But the one thing that did strike me was when fathers didn't know that they were the father, they were more happy to be doing the rearing. So having women who were polyamorous, having multiple seed, as it writes, that they didn't know who actually got them pregnant. In that way, all of the men became, well, we'll support it. But to me, it doesn't seem to sit comfortably that the fall of civilization and the lead to monogamy partly was because of course the agricultural revolution, but then that men started to realize that they were the fathers, and it was like, oh no, we can't do that. It just makes me wonder, as a historian, what was the motive or what is the perspective that they're putting out? Because today that we see where there's certainly single families, it's those children of single families, namely, where the fathers have gone, that seem to be the most difficult or have the most difficulties in society. So it just struck me about this. Well, it was almost a sweeping statement. Where they didn't know they were the father, they were certainly contributing to fathering. Where they did know, they would leave. Odd, but nevertheless.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm not a historian, but I do love history, and so I kind of focused on historical aspects in this discussion. Just Bruce.
Yeah, and then just at the very beginning of a person's maturing, the church has such negative teachings where, I don't even know if kids nowadays know what necking and petting was, but I think that was very defined before, and you find stuff at church still referring to those terms, and kids are going like, what? But we know, I guess in general, we know the human brain doesn't completely develop until around 25, but we are, I think, naturally pushing kids into getting married very young and also not knowing each other very well. So those are just some of my comments, as it related to my experience. So let's go on with the discussion.
Okay. Let's see if that worked. Nope, that did not work. There we go. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Darwin standard narrative. I'm not sure who's getting married here, which one's Darwin, but this is what AI gave me, versus fierce egalitarianism. And I watched a TEDx or a TED Talk, I'm not sure exactly which one it was, but that Christopher Ryan gave discussing this book. And so some of my stuff is going to come from that. Oh, wait, no, back up. So the authors argue against the prevailing belief that humans are inherently monogamous creatures. In his TED Talk from 2012, Christopher Ryan calls this belief Darwin's standard narrative. So Darwin's standard narrative is that men have least women's reproductive potential. This is what he says in his TED Talk. By providing them with certain goods and services, meat, shelter, status, protection. In return, women often offer fidelity. This sets men and women up in an oppositional relationship. The war between the sexes is built right into our DNA, according to this position. But instead, Sex at Dawn argues that humans practice fierce egalitarianism, which is, move on, there we go. Fierce egalitarianism. Quote, they demand things be shared, all the things supposedly being traded to women for their sexual fidelity, it turns out, are shared widely among these societies. This is simply the best way to mitigate risk in a foraging context. And there's no real argument about this among anthropologists. All Cacilda and I have done is extend this sharing behavior to sexuality. So we've argued that human sexuality has eventually evolved until agriculture as a way of establishing and maintaining the complex, flexible social systems that our ancestors were very good at. And that's why our species has survived so well. So actually, here's one of my my criticisms. The quote, all Cacilda and I have done is extend this sharing behavior to sexuality. They seem to do that on occasion. They extend, here's the data, here's the you know, what the scientists and the researchers have come up with, and we're going to just apply it over here without any justification for why they can apply it. They do that a few times, and maybe it's valid, maybe not. But that's just that quote really struck me. So, of course, this discussion wouldn't be complete if we didn't throw in some Mormon theology. The Family Proclamation says, the first commandment that God gave to Adam and Eve pertained to their potential for parenthood as husband and wife. So we must be, Adam and Eve were first, and they were married. So questions. What stood out? Let me see. What stood out to you regarding the standard narrative that monogamy and marriage are ancient practices? What stood out regarding fierce egalitarianism? Do you agree with the author's extending sharing behavior to sexuality, where I had a little issue with that? Do you agree promiscuity helps strengthen social ties, which we talked about? Do you think it could do so in today's society? Is a belief in Adam and Eve being the first married couple beneficial to society? Why or why not? Landon.
Yeah, the first thing I noticed is, the idea of Adam and Eve, we know through DNA and whatnot that there was no Adam and Eve, but the story starts is basically an agrarian society. The two sons, one of them's a kind of a hunter and the other one's a farmer. So you get agrarianism right away, which leads to a man and a woman in a monogamous relationship. So I think that Adam and Eve are really based on that agrarian society and not on the ancient, much later, much earlier marriages. But Rebecca and I just yesterday, and it's going to air on Tuesday for Mormonish, we did an episode on same-sex marriage and could it work and how could it work theologically. And as we went through it, one of the things we found is there is no theology in the Bible for marriage in heaven and afterwards and all of these things that we see in the Mormon philosophy. It's just not there. It might say man and a woman, but we also have Abraham who married multiple wives in the scriptures. But almost everything we know, proclamation of the family, comes from late prophets, modern day prophets, and it's not in the scriptures at all. And we went through and looked at how marriage and how sealings have changed over time. And it's a big hot mess. You could be sealed to, if someone dies and you marry someone else and they'd been married. Once you die, you can be sealed to them. And so you start having these sealings where you have lots of men and lots of women who are sealed to multiple people. And it just, the whole thing becomes kind of ridiculous. In the end, what happens is you have this big sealing that looks exactly like what he just discussed. You have all these people who are all sealed together in this sealing chain to raise the spirit children of God. So it really goes back, when you look at the sealing chains, it goes back to exactly what he was describing here with multiple people raising families. The nuclear family hardly ever exists in society. It's really an invention since 1950s and was a reaction to the Cold War because you had godless communism. And so you had to have we started becoming more spiritual, and we put the family, and the nuclear family became the center of everything. And that's now what the church has fallen to. But when you look back, they weren't the nuclear family was not the primary thing in the 1800s, far from it. And when we look back through all of history, we see that the nuclear family was not the norm for almost all of history. So that idea is just kind of debunked through history when you look at it. It's not to say monogamy didn't exist and that it's not an acceptable way. It just wasn't the norm for, even today, it's not the norm when you talk about divorces and widows and different things, to have just one man and one woman married for all the time and that not be break. That's really not even the normal today.
That is true. And I actually have a friend who is Black, and she talks about that the married stay-at-home mom model has never been the norm in the Black community. And I also wanted to mention, you brought up ceilings, Landon. I have heard, and I don't know if this is, the standard narrative, not standard narrative, but if that possibly that was the getting everybody sealed to everybody was kind of Joseph Smith's initial thought, was that he wanted to have these ties, which is, he was sealing to men as brothers, and that's
there was three types. There was three types of sealings. Kingdom, which was what Joseph Smith did. It was a priesthood sealing. He was sealing everybody, the law of adoption and the law of plural marriage, and everyone got sealed together. It was a priesthood network is what he was sealing. Then it went to lineage, where you did just your family, but then they ran out of names and said, well, we've sealed everybody who's in our lineage. And so then they went to what's family, where you now do husband and wife, and you do name extraction, do everybody. So those are kind of the three levels of sealings that they've done over time. So you're right.
Okay.
They used to just seal everyone in priesthood networks, not in so much in marriages.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for clarifying that. Bruce.
Yeah, my observation at this point is, we've kind of at some point defined marriage. The Adam and Eve story is one thing, but then that morphed into Middle Eastern polygamy and Mormon polygamy and then Mormon monogamy. But the thing that I notice is that if you have power and wealth, your ability to satisfy your sexual needs is much more available to you. I like to watch some of the YouTube channels. So one's called Useful Charts, that goes through and defines, all the royal lineages and stuff, and they're always having to have legitimate and illegitimate children. Joseph Smith got power and money, and he started, fulfilling his sexual urges with younger women and many other women. You take a look at politicians. Serial monogamy often goes on. The last president, had 3 different wives, plus he's also obviously had sex with many people because he's being sued for it. You have the British royal family, where there's always somebody else, even though the marriage seems to be pretty good or functioning, but there's always this stuff on the side. So when you have power and money, you can then, satisfy your needs a little more, not necessarily openly, but with less consequences than, cheating on your wife, when you're in Draper, Utah, or then maybe you decide to both cheat on, or join the swingers and stuff. But it's interesting when people have power, you see more of this open sexual relationships going on. So just my observation.
Thanks. See, I am unmuted. Okay. Okay, so next we are going to go on the agricultural revolution. Sexual promiscuity, the thought is that sexual promiscuity helped our ancestors survive by sharing fatherhood amongst the group and sharing social ties. And I'm quoting a lot or paraphrasing a lot from an analysis done on this book from a website called Blinkist. Because our ancestors engaged in lots of casual sex and had a limited understanding of conception, they had no way of knowing who the father of any given child was. This is what Landon was talking about. Thus, every male was inclined to care and provide for every child, a responsibility that was distributed among the group. As a result, food and other goods were shared, also improving the chances of survival for everyone. Casual sex strengthens bonds within the group because it tends to keep the participants happy, relaxed, and amiable. The hormone oxytocin is largely responsible for this phenomenon, sometimes called nature's ecstasy. It is released during sex and produces feelings of closeness and peace. What do you think about that idea? Any thoughts on that? Yes. Landon won.
Beat you, Bruce. I thought it was kind of a neat idea that by doing that, they talked about the bonobos and how much peaceful it was because all the men weren't fighting over the women. It was kind of a shared thing, and so they were kind of. I just saw a bunch of laid back monkeys that were, smoking cigarettes. It's the picture I got in my mind. But I thought that's an interesting concept anyway. That if you don't have to fight over the resources and you're sharing everything, that there's not a reason to be, fighting over it as much. So I thought it was an interesting outlook. I guess, some of these things I know are controversial in the book, whether there's societies where they weren't fighting because of this. I don't know, but I did think it was a neat idea, or at least a neat concept to think about.
Yeah, thank you. Bruce?
Yeah. The agricultural revolution is something I've come across in a number of books that I've read. I have a hard time with my health and everything, and so I read lots of books on that. And stuff that keeps coming up is that the hunter-gatherers had very good diverse diets, and they tended to be taller and more healthy. When agriculture came along, we started specializing in just certain grains and certain animals, and that kind of limited the variety of food, therefore our health. And it also gave rise to, property. And if you had more food, you could then support slaves. And it moved from that egalitarian world where it's also pointed out that sex was more egalitarian, that the agricultural revolution, we have poorer health because we eat a lot less variety of foods and plants and nuts and seeds and stuff than the hunter-gatherers did. And it seems like sex was something that was lost. I can't imagine that, the thousands and thousands of years of hunter-gatherer, what he described as, the sexual climate wasn't kind of healthy and working for them. But then the agricultural revolution just, put a whole wrench in things, and we've been dealing that for 3,000 or 4,000 years, and stuff. So just kind of my observations that maybe some of that old style living might be interesting.
Thanks. Oh, Yvonne, yes.
I just have to read this quote because I'm such a feminist. It says, to follow on with what Bruce was saying, clearly the biggest loser, aside from slaves perhaps, in the agricultural revolution was the human female, who went from occupying a central, respected role in foraging societies to becoming another possession for a man to earn and defend, along with his house, his fields, and his livestock.
Yep.
Yeah, we are actually, yes, that's exactly what I have going next, which I loved that AI came up with this particular picture. You got the woman taking care of the cooking and all the men, it's all men in the background doing all the, stuff, which I thought was very funny. Okay, so we're going to talk about exactly what Yvonne just mentioned, the timeline of what happened to women during the agricultural revolution. Prior to agriculture, people shared whatever food they found so it wouldn't be wasted. And then farming created the ideas of ownership and prosperity, possessiveness, jealousy, and greed. Then the idea of possession and consequent jealousy soon extended to sexual relations and family. Again, here they're making a leap but in logic, but I think it's probably an apt leap. There we go. The only way for the farmer to be certain of his paternity was to force women into fidelity by public shaming, brute physical force, or legal institutions such as marriage. Women's skills as gatherers became redundant, and their role was gradually limited to taking care of the children. As women's roles became limited to raising the family, the modern ideas arose regarding female weakness, etc. So that is kind of the progression for women. So the questions are, do you agree with the author's assertion that the agricultural revolution led directly to the downfall of egalitarianism, and sexual sharing? Why or why not? And then the family proclamation raises its head again, claims that God commanded that the sacred powers of procreation are to be employed only between man and woman lawfully wedded as husband and wife. So hallelujah for the agricultural revolution. Thoughts on that? Any of that? Landon.
I agreed with him because, as he pointed out, in a hunter-gatherer society, the women gathered just as much. You know, the men might have been doing the hunting, but the women were doing the gathering, and since everyone was sharing everything, it was a lot easier for the women to not have that they could survive without the man, whereas in the agricultural society where they had that they were reliant on the man to produce the food, whereas in the hunter-gatherers they didn't. I know, having gone through a divorce, that's the hardest part, is trying to split up how do you take care of somebody, how do you divide the possessions so to make sure everybody's taken care of and that you both can survive. Whereas if you've got everything in common anyway, if all you have to do is split up, that's a much easier way, and nobody's getting hurt as much. So I can certainly see where that plays a part. And I think in our modern world, we're kind of going back to that hunter-gatherer situation where a lot of women are going back to work and providing for themselves. I know a lot of people who, when they get divorced, it's not as traumatic because they both have incomes, they both have retirement plans. And so for them, it's not as hard as if you do follow the traditional LDS plan where the wife stays at home and all of a sudden she doesn't have a retirement or anything else. And now you've got a problem. So my own personal situation, I certainly see that makes it a lot more difficult than it would be in a hunter-gatherer situation to do that, and where you'd feel that ownership and more difficult to separate it from each other.
Yes, I agree. Bruce.
Yeah, the proclamation of the family, when I read your statement there, I'm just going like, okay, the church requires that you believe that you are broken and that you need, one, the atonement of Jesus and the church as the only conduit to Jesus. And that gives them power and money. And so this, I think, is just, an organization trying to capitalize on some of the, I guess, bad things of the agricultural revolution in control. I know personally, the church had me convinced that I was so broken, and I stepped away because I, didn't want to feel so broken I would kill myself. And Yeah, it's interesting how the organization that has a basis in polygamy has come up with the family proclamation. It's going like, interesting. So
I agree. The church and other churches and organizations do this. They create the problem, they create the weakness, they create that they then have the solution for. That you have to buy into their thought process and their rules to solve the problem that they created. Yeah. Anything else anybody wants to say about the agricultural revolution? Okay. Next up, monogamy. So let me see, what have I got here? First, I want to say I'm quoting a couple of times Esther Perel. I don't know if you've heard of Esther Perel. She's a psychotherapist known for her work on human relationships. She works with clients experiencing infidelity and examines the complexity of sustaining desire. I pulled her into the discussion because her expertise is adjacent to the hypotheses put forward in the book. She is very much open to that desire and that lust and love are different things, and you can live with the two. And anyway, you'll see a couple, like I said, I used a couple of her quotes. From the book, the idea of cheating is a social construct in nature. There is no such thing as infidelity. And I want to hear what you think about that. And Esther Perel says, monogamy is the sacred cow of the romantic ideal, for it is the marker of our specialness. When your hand or mind wanders, my importance is shattered. And of course, the family proclamation. The family is ordained of God. Marriage between man and woman is essential to his eternal plan. Children are entitled to birth within the bonds of matrimony and to be reared by a father and a mother who honor marital vows with complete fidelity. So yeah, this, again ties in or is a big glaring, what about polygamy? Because this does not address polygamy at all. Oh, no. Okay, so does monogamy run counter to human nature? What would that mean for individuals and societies if monogamy was not the cultural norm? And how can families provide stability to children in a non-monogamous family situation? David.
Oh my goodness. So when there was a traditional polyamory in the tribes, it was one of tradition, one of culture. But I think one thing that they didn't either develop further or understand is that monogamy was akin to modernity. It was about the ownership. So it introduced the legal frameworks, certainly for the West, where there was a judiciary ceremony saying, you will only be with this person and no other. So when they were starting to talk about non-monogamous relationship, it was literally a breach of a legal contract. So polygamy, again, could be brought into that because that was part of a legal framework. But it wasn't just simply a development of hunter-gatherer agricultural. We're talking about the whole, the very pre-industrialization, the promoting, as I said, of modernity. So it's so complex to answer any of these questions. But I just thought it was interesting that they didn't really cover much on the judicial side, the introduction of lawful frameworks, which created more formally the monogamy.
I agree. And actually, to the judicial side, back with the Prop 8 issue, I was confused by the whole thing because I was, just young and like, okay, whatever they say is right, whether or not I understand it, kind of a thought. And I came to the conclusion that the legal marriage as a legal contract should not be the same as a religious ceremony. That those are two separate things, and they should be two separate things, and then you don't have a problem. That whole thing is solved, if that makes any sense. Bruce.
Yeah, I just have some comments on my personal perspective, being an older gay man. In gay culture, monogamy is really common because most of the gay people grew up with the same proclamation of the family, one-on-one. But open relationships are also pretty common with sometimes there's rules like if you're traveling for work and you're not in your zip code where you live, you're allowed to experience things with other people. Open relationships also include people inviting a third into their Dan Savage, the sex advice columnist, uses the term monogamish. So a couple who considers themselves monogamish may invite somebody else into their a physical relationship, and then there are the ones where both partners are pretty free to go seek partners elsewhere, but when they come home at night, they're together, or at least they're together even though they may live in separate houses and apartments, because not all gay couples actually live together. That would drive me crazy. I've been single for years. I'm going like, I'm not sharing my space with anybody. But it is because the gay community was outside of the ability to get married until recently. And the 60s and 70s free love movement, I think that was an effort by the young at that time, rebelling against some of these requirements and views of what marriage and relationships were. It brought some problems, but it is interesting that it doesn't always kind of work the way that the proclamation of the family says. That's my comment.
So I had a question and now it has gone. But let's go to the second question. Does anybody have a comment on what would it mean for the society if monogamy was not the cultural norm? If we had polyamory, or would that take? Do you think that would take us back to the hunter-gatherer? Do you think that's even possible to happen in our society? I see some shaking heads. Rebecca?
Yeah, I don't know if you got my hand. I was thinking, I always watch House Hunters, right? It's one of my favorite shows. I don't even know if it's still on, but back in the day. And I remember watching an episode where suddenly there was a throuple that was searching for a house. And I remember that House Hunters had the first same-sex couple decades ago that was searching for a house. And so to me, House Hunters is sort of a finger on the pulse of how things are going or how things are becoming more acceptable. Because I remember those very controversial. They showed a same-sex couple searching for a house. It's a program for those that don't know. They follow a couple looking for a house and all the different choices and everything. And they pick one. It's all amazing. I saw this one with a throuple. And I'm like, this is very interesting that they're training this is, and they were looking at all the needs that this throuple would need, X bedroom, or would this were a common space, shared space, And I thought, this is really fascinating. If this dynamic has made it onto a television program about, home decor and house hunting, this probably is going to be more norm in the future, or different things that are just different from the dynamic that we're all used to. And then they're talking in the show about who was going to purchase the house and how would that work, with the mortgage and the write-up. And that made me think, everything is going to change when this becomes more common and out in the open, because legally, like Bruce touched on, the framework around protecting and supporting people that consensually enter into something like this, it's going to be really, I think, revolutionary as far as what we see, because there will have to be those protections. Even something as fairly simple as buying a house. They were thinking about now, are we all three on it? How does this work? If one decides to sell, whatever, the RUPL, disintegrates. So I feel like, and I know these things are already being talked about and some in place in different states, but I think we're going to see a revolution just in protections and the legal side of all of this, which will reshape society completely. So all because of house hunters. My litmus test for all of society.
Thank you. Yes, so I remember watching House Hunters and seeing the same-sex couples and thinking, oh, interesting. And they have normalized it and helped them. And I love that about it.
Yep.
Landon.
Yeah, I think Melissa said property laws would change, which I think is what Rebecca said. I think family law would also have to change extensively when you have children. It works in the village where everybody is taking care of someone, that if the children aren't affected because it's across the culture just continues to take the children. In our society, that would not work, because the person who creates the children is responsible for feeding the children and raising the children. And so what would you do in that case if that's no longer the case and everybody's moving around and the children are from different fathers? But that being said, you kind of have to define monogamy anyway. What does that mean? Because I would say that our society currently, if monogamy means one man, one woman, and that's it forever, our society is not monogamous right now. Between divorces, between indiscretions within the marriage, or people hooking up who aren't married, that monogamy is by no means the norm at this point. But certainly once you have children, the family laws would have to, there'd have to be some protection to watch out for the children, and where do the children go when the parents keep switching around. That's an unstable home for the children, and that could be detrimental. So there are certainly some things that have to be considered there when we don't have that framework to support it. The society would have to change to support that, not just laws. The whole culture would have to change, I think.
Makes sense. That's a whole nother, issue, can of worms. Bruce.
Yeah, talking about the laws and, responsibilities people have when creating children and stuff. I have a family member I'm involved with that when she got married, she came to the relationship with significant assets. And those assets were held in a trust. And while they're happily married, that trust that is my niece's sole property owns their home that's paid for and a lot of their resources, but they're happily married. If he gets everything, but we just use that to protect a pretty young, inexperienced person. So those type of laws, I think, would have to kind of be in place. I have another set of family members that, while I have not talked to them, many of the former Mormons in the family believe that he is gay and she's lesbian, and they are active believing members, and they have a number of children. And I'm just going like, okay, well, they've chosen, and I kind of just in my mind, I don't know because I haven't talked to them about it, that they made that conscious choice, and they've got a bunch of kids now. So that's a project that they need to play out. You can't just say, oh, I'm not looking, for this sexually from the relationship, and you get to go away. You've got, child support and nurturing, and, if you're having a child, you need to say, okay, I'm going in to get them to being an adult and then having a decent family relationship with them. So yeah, it's interesting because in the hunter-gatherer society, I think culture was kind of that open thing, and it evolved to be natural. if somebody died, like in an accident or hunting or sickness, then the other people in the village just kind of took over the parenting. It's that whole it takes a village kind of thing. With all of our property rights, some of that would have to really change. And if you're going into a non-traditional relationship, you've got to probably take all those things into account. If you're going to stray from what our legal system and our culture does. But just some of my 2 cents.
In the chat, Yvonne said, for children, serial monogamy seems so disruptive. And I have thought about that in relation to this. And I know some people who are polyamorous, and, obviously there's the whole parents and serial monogamy issue also. And I have wondered, is that disruptive because it's our society, to what Bruce was just saying? Is it disruptive because it's our society to be one father, one mother, and that's it, and it doesn't take a village, and no other men will step in, and it's not considered for the children. The children aren't in a society where it's okay to have multiple fathers or multiple mothers, and everybody's just kind of, and actually, was that a positive feature of polygamy, having multiple mothers? Any thoughts on that? Because I don't have thoughts on it. I just have questions. Yvonne, there we go. Unmuted, Yvonne.
Okay. I mean, because I brought that up because I have seen, my kids' marriages and 50%. I had 5 kids, so I've had 2 divorces in my children's families, and it meant, because we're so strict, I think marriage, I think the idea of a couple, 2 people or 3 people or whatever, legally committing to each other and to having, if they're ready, and raising children, and that, they could make the rules themselves, but I think the book is arguing that these are conversations they need to have before they're married, obviously, are you a 10 in sexuality? And so you need, maybe it's the sex thing, right? That shouldn't be so serious and important, but we have made it that way. And, if you can't stay with someone who's committed adultery, right? Or you can, but I think you're even looked down on. I have a sister-in-law, and this is her parents, but her mother cataloged 18 affairs that her father had, but she never divorced him. She stayed with him. And I don't know, it's just our whole attitude towards sex. I think that not marriage itself, but that it could be, it's between 2 adults who are going to commit, whether they're gay, straight, trans, lesbian, whatever they are, hetero. We're going to stay together. And there's actually somebody in popular media that exemplifies this. And I'm not a follower of these people, but I just heard it. And, but you all know who Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith are. And, the big Oscar slap when somebody insulted his wife, but they weren't living together at the time. They have different sexual proclivities apparently, but they have this loyalty. And she talked about it. She said, I know that he has my back through my entire life, whoever he sleeps with. She didn't say that, but that's how I understood it. Whatever his sex, we are committed to each other, to our marriage, to our children, and we'll have each other's back. And thoughts?
Okay, Yvonne, this is the second time you've talked about the scale of being a 10 or being a 1 or 2. And so, well, I will share this. As someone who's maybe a 1, 2, maybe a 0 even at times, when I was married and they were talking about polygamy after death, And well, I won't go into what my ex-husband said about after we divorced, what was going to happen as far as his new wife and me. But I used to remember, I remember thinking, okay, well, the second wife could maybe be an 8 or 9 or 10, and then I would be left alone. So yeah, that part of polygamy in the afterlife, I kind of liked. Maybe TMI. Bruce.
Okay, well, this kind of is along that. In Mormon culture, the path to being married is so accelerated, and the knowledge of sex and the knowledge of each other is so limited when marriage is entered into. I think it sets it up for disaster just from the beginning, because what do people know about sex when they're 18, high school, you go on a mission, you come back, the mission president says you need to get married within a few months, and you get this 17, 18-year-old girl that's in high school, and the guy's cute, and they don't know about their own sexual lives and what they want, where they are on the scale of sexuality. And then they get stuck in, and then also, the kind of implied no birth control, and you start having kids, and how never having had kids, but my understanding is that sex life changes dramatically when you have kids. And I believe the book talked about that. And so,
Bruce, real quick to your point, my personal experience was I didn't realize. I thought there was just something wrong with me.
Yeah.
That and I just needed to fix this. I didn't realize until just a year or so ago, that there's nothing wrong with me. It's just who I am. And yeah. If I had known, we could have had discussions, and he felt, it wasn't good for him to have me be a 1 or 2.
Yeah, no. And I think the whole thing, like I've suggested to people that I knew were getting married, go to marriage counseling and go through the gigantic list of stuff that's going to come up in your lives, because you don't know what each of you think. And then also, I kind of personally think people should live together before they get married, because you don't get to see a real person if they're gussying up for a date and they're presenting their best foot forward. You get it when you realize the person doesn't do any dishes and doesn't pick up after themselves, and or spends money just crazy. What are your goals together? And I think if you had a more developed sexual understanding of yourself and your relationship, then when you start to have children, you can have that discussion about, okay, what does this mean? And I also, this is coming from an old guy who's never been in a really successful relationship that's traditional, but like saying, okay, plan out how a divorce would go with our assets and with the kids before we get into it. What do you think is reasonable, mature adult behavior and stuff? So I don't know. This is somebody who does not have experience pontificating, so I will stop.
Thanks. Rebecca.
Yeah, I was going to address your prior comment, but now I have something to say about what Bruce said too. So I think it's interesting because not only do you not know each other, but if you're both LDS, you're in this framework where somebody else is running the show, right? Your Mormon lizard brain, and that can cause real problems when one of you steps away and one of you doesn't, or you change your points of view. Your behavior can change radically. I think about friend that we have who, he kind of stepped away from the church, did not want to pay tithing anymore, and then found out that his wife was giving tens of thousands of dollars from their shared bank account to the church because she couldn't not do it, even though they talked about it and agreed they wouldn't. And he eventually had to leave the relationship because you can't do that with that behavior. You know, his assets were not safe. She was literally giving almost everything they had to the church to try to make up for the fact probably that he had stepped away or whatever. So you have these behaviors that kind of come out, you know, it's not just you, the couple, there's this sort of overarching organization, you know, if you're LDS that plays into the twos. And how do you talk about that when you're dating? You can't. So things really morph. But I was speak to Yvonne, and Shauna had said about polygamy. So I have a very long, dicey history with polygamy. I was raised in an Orthodox family, not polygamist, ever, very pro-polygamy. Let me know from a very early age, I would be part polygamous union in the next life. That's what I had to look forward to. My mom was thrilled. There would be sister wives from my dad. I mean, we had the picture of the ancestors in the striped prison clothes, the mantle. I was raised in a very pro-polygamy, celestial polygamy household. And so because of that, I was really upset as a teenager about it. I would cry about it. But at that point, not married yet. I'm just thinking of the jealousy and the sex aspect, right? I didn't know anything about those things, but that's all I could see from my limited view, 15, 16, really upset that even if I do someday get married, I have to share that person, you know, very upset. Then you get older, you do get married, you go on, you have kids. And I remember that my view sort of shifted on polygamy when the series Big Love came out, which was based on the Apostolic United Brethren, which is a branch, a polygamous branch that is here everywhere in Utah. And you wouldn't know it because they look just like everybody else. They don't have the poofy hair and they don't have the past dresses. And Big Love, I watched that. I was like, no, that's very interesting because look at all the shared, you know, community with the kids. The kids do have, you know, different parents that can support them. They do have different moms. One mom was working, one home for the, you know, it was just this very symbiotic relationship portrayed in Big Love. I started thinking, oh, that is really interesting. I can see the benefit of that. Honestly, I shared, you know, and I raised my kids away from any family, no help from parents on each side. I was completely alone, you know, just my nuclear family. I had no help. So I started to be attracted kind of to the benefit of that. And then we have a friend, Phillips. You guys may have seen us interview her. She was raised in the AUB, and we've interviewed her several times, and she's talked about her 5 mothers and, you know, her 30 something siblings, and just what a great experience it was. You know, I don't think they have the darker side that perhaps FLDS does. I think they're more a Main Street group that has just chosen to live in this polygamous scenario. And I was always amazed at the pushback that we'd get in the comments on those episodes that we were glorifying polygamy. When really we were discussing a different lifestyle that seemed to work for people. And they were very free. There were a lot of people that had chosen to come in, you know, converted. So consenting, knowing what was happening. People left at any time. It was kind of back and forth. So I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to say that my view has shifted from being devastated and upset as a teenager. Of course, I realized there is no next life and I don't have to worry about it, but to seeing certain benefits of consenting adults, you know, marrying not underage, but consenting, you know, connecting at an age where you know what you're doing. I can see that it's a lifestyle that can work for people. So I don't know. Attitudes are shifting, at least for me, I think. So I don't know what anyone else thinks about that, but interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, that is a whole nother, tangent there. Landon, you had some.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Rebecca just said and what Yvonne said, you know, that one of the big problems with the church is they not only do they not encourage you to explore your sexuality when you're young and can actually, you know, before you make all these commitments, but they specifically forbid you from exploring your sexuality beforehand. And I think that's just devastating. You could avoid so many problems, I think, if people at least had an idea of what they were getting into and what the match was. You know, I mean, when I got married, I was like, you know, I'm a 20-something-year-old and I'm like always wanting it. My wife didn't, and I didn't know that till we got married. And it's like, well, what do I do now? I'm in this situation. Am I doing something wrong? I have no experience to compare it against. So you're left wondering the whole time, am I, you know, is it me? Is it her? Is there something wrong? What is this? And so you start second guessing. And then you've got this cases where the church tells you, oh, well, you just need to marry a woman. And then you have so many men or women who are finding out that they're same-sex attracted, but they had never looked or explored or knew anything enough to identify that. Now that's devastating to a marriage. So, you know, I'm not saying go out and do everything, but you should explore what interests you and figure it out before you make that commitment. Because, you know, when you're young, it's like, oh, marriage, we just get married and everything's fine. And then when you're older, you start going, wow, there's a lot more to this than just, you know, we both believe in the church. Let's have kids. You know, there's a
But
lot
you
more.
can make it work.
But
Any
you can make it
two
work if you're both.
worthy, yeah,
Yep. If you're both have a testimony, you can make anything work. You know, and
exactly, yeah.
and that works for a while, but definitely, I'm amazed since I've left how open I can be in conversations about this and how my mind has completely changed because I've seen some things work for some people and it works for them, and it's like, well, maybe that would work for me. Why not? Why do I close my mind to that? Because I was taught that you had to do it a certain way. So I think having an open mind and being willing to explore different ideas and different ways of doing things, everyone doesn't have to be the same. That's the church's motto. Everyone has to be exactly the same. And in
Yes,
reality, we don't have to be the same. And when you open your eyes to that and say, if they want to do this and they're happy with it, what do I care? That's great that they're happy with it. And so I've just been more open since I've left to be able to kind of think through that and say, oh, there's options out there, you know?
exactly. Jeffrey.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is about power dynamics. So if you, one of the things about agrarian societies, I think was raised here, is the power starts getting centralized, whereas hunter-gatherers are more decentralized. And as a consequence, if you're born into that society, or if you decide to join that society, all of a sudden you're subject to those power dynamics. And one of the things people don't think enough about in the church is if you're lucky enough to fall into, I estimate this is about 1/3 of the population, that where your preferences and your identity, however you define it, your experience aligns with the church, then you don't feel it. You don't feel the problem. Whereas if you come in and there's something different about how you behave relative to the church's expectations, all of a sudden the power is brought upon you in a very passive aggressive way. And this is something I think secular people don't understand, or people that haven't been raised in the church, because they will say to me, you know, you're quite critical of what's going on, but all the Mormons I know are super nice. And even people inside the church, some of my relatives will say, well, you know, it's not like I'm being forced to do anything. I'm just choosing these things. But then you look at it at another layer, and they have, you know, they're cisgender, heteronormative, and even in some cases, the wife is happy. She's voluntarily, to some extent, happy with the situation. Like maybe she likes to make the food. Maybe she likes to have the role in the home. But that's a very small percentage of the larger group. And then everybody else that doesn't fall into that box are subjected to these power dynamics. And then if, you know, like you guys were saying, when you come back from your mission, it's like have kids and magnify your calling and build your career. You don't even have time to think about it. And so then everybody slides into that dynamic and they're heavily manipulated, because if you break up against the constraint or beat up against the constraint, you're going to have a leader, or what's even worse than leaders are relatives, like family. It's like parents and siblings and cousins coming and saying, you know, you guys aren't really following what's going on. And then the last point I'll make, I find it interesting in the church, they talk so much. I estimate it's like 95% of all talks in sacrament meeting and general conference are how you find knowledge, like who you talk to, what you read, but very little is ever spoken explicitly what that knowledge is. I mean, I tried this with a nephew of mine who's going on a mission. I said, look, just tell me the 4 things that you actually are going to be teaching on a mission. And all he could say is modern revelation. I said, no, that's the how. It's like, I want to know the what. And what's interesting about that is, since it gives the senior leadership deniability, because they don't explicitly say don't use birth control. I know a few people have in the past, but then the society creates the expectation, yes, everybody doesn't use birth control. Or then, you know, I've never heard them say from the pulpit, wait to have children until you're stable in your relationship or you have enough money. But privately, some people will say that, but I've even had situations where other family members are putting pressure on newly married family members or relatives. You know, you guys need to start having children now. You know, don't worry about going into debt. Don't worry that you haven't finished your education. And since the official communication is rarely specific, then people can say externally, look, it's not we're forcing people to do this. But anyway, I think it's just often about power dynamics.
Good point there, Jeffrey. Thank you. It's a lot of it's about power, right? David.
I was going to say, it's just before I come to my point about that one about birth control. I know when, you know, we came off your mission president say, you know, you are a danger to the church unless you get yourself married. But the handbook at the time, you know, it literally said, for those who practice birth control will reap disappointment by and by. And then when we thought there was a great modernization and President Hinckley changed the wording, actually, it didn't change the context of it, of what was actually there. It just said it's a personal, intimate decision between a husband and wife and the Lord. So they didn't actually renege on what was being said. But when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about the Amish, and they're certainly, you know, in a very strict framework. But, you know, the youth, when they get to late teens and they consider whether they're going to go to the way of the world or to the way of the Amish more formally, they go on what we call Rumspringa. I don't know if you heard about that. You know, it's the only way I can explain it is spring break for co-eds and students going away. You know, it's you then let out whatever tensions you have, whatever they may be, and then you come back and put all that behind you. But of course, that could never happen in a Mormon type environment. I mean, even within the Amish, you would be able to go into the same bed but separated by a board, so you could talk during the night. In Mormonism, you're not even meant to be under the same roof till you're at least 21 with 3 chaperones. You let alone go close to someone's bedroom. So you have this fragility that the moment you do that, you're suddenly triggering, oh my goodness, I've done something wrong. Then your world comes crashing down. And it's like, well, actually, it's come crashing down now, so it doesn't matter. We've gone too far. So there's not a maturity about relationships. There's not a maturity about sexuality. In fact, the church avoids talking about it. So even approaching or exploring, you become either feeling condemned or you're taught by your priesthood leaders that it's inappropriate behavior. And to answer your question, what do you learn? You know, I know, as Jeff Foxworthy said, that when I come in the house and my wife's upset, I don't need to ask. I know it's going to be my fault. And the only way you can deal with it is saying, can I go to my room and think about it? That's what I've learned after 31 years. And it kind of still works.
I like that. Bruce.
Well, I thought one of the interesting chapters was talking about birth control and how some of our artificial birth control affects how and who women are attracted to. And when they go on and off birth control, it can change things. And again, it's knowledge, transparency, you know, to make better choices. I don't know how that works. I've never been worried about birth control and stuff, but yeah, having a broad understanding of how the world works, how biology works, how relationships work, and then kind of figuring out how to make it work best for you. I mean, that's that whole exploring the world beyond Mormonism, because it's a big puzzle, and I'm not sure there's just any easy answers, but I think with more knowledge and understanding and openness and transparency with the people you're doing this with, you might get a better outcome.
Yes, that's true. So I'm looking at this. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Bruce. This is not. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Looking at a comment from Jeffrey in the chat. He says, also the mythology that your family was established in the premortal existence is used to imply that birth control interferes with relationships before this life. It reminded me that this week I watched Mormon movie reviews. Devos, is that his name? He did Saturday's Warrior, and there's the family in heaven, and then when Pam dies, she meets up with the, and anyway, if you know the show, you know what I'm talking about. So I will move on since I advanced my slide. That the other thought that I found interesting in the book, so wanted to kind of discuss, is the idea that true love means lifelong. The lifelong monogamy that idea is a source of despair and disease. And from the summary, it says, when you truly love someone, you won't ever need anyone else in your life. And sex with that one special person will always be great, right? Well, it's a nice story, but it's certainly not a true one. Just because we're able to feel deep love for a person for the rest of our lives does not necessarily mean that we'll continue to desire that person. In fact, because our ancestors evolved to have sex with anyone they liked, we're biologically programmed to seek out sex with many different partners. The disparity between the messages of romantic comedies and the actual experience of being in a monogamous relationship can lead to profound unhappiness. By considering monogamy as our natural state, we often confuse love and sex. We tend to misinterpret a lack of lust for our partner as a lack of love. Similarly, we often confuse sexual excitement we get from an extramarital fling with feelings of true love for that person. But the dangers of monogamy don't stop there. It's also seriously bad for your health. As studies have shown, men in long-term monogamous relationships suffer a big drop in their testosterone levels. The drop happens because the male sex drive and the hormone testosterone are interrelated. So if one dwindles, the other will too. And it can lead to potentially fatal diseases. Low testosterone levels in men are associated with depression, heart disease, and cancer. And this is another one of those, does this really make sense? Did they leap their logic and jump, a few sharks to get to that conclusion? Which is a question I will have. But right now, we've got the quote from the book. The concept of sexual exclusivity often leads to deceit and betrayal, whereas openness fosters honesty and transparency. And we have Esther Perel saying there is more than a hint of arrogance in the assumption that we can make our relationships permanent, which I actually find kind of sad, though maybe true. And then from the proclamation, we warn that individuals who violate covenants of chastity, who abuse spouse or offspring, or who fail to fulfill family responsibilities will one day stand accountable before God. Further, we warn that the disintegration of the family will bring upon individuals, communities, and nations the calamities foretold by ancient and modern prophets. So, do you believe lack of lust for a partner equals lack of love? What are your thoughts on the theory that monogamous relationships are hazardous to male health and are despair and disease the calamities foretold by ancient and modern prophets? Any other calamities you can think of that this lack of monogamy will create?
Yeah, disease is the biggest one, I think. Currently, that you could pass something on or catch something, and then that would pass on.
That's true.
To someone that you really care about and really do love. So sometimes, lust seems, oh wow, do that but it could have long-lasting consequences for both you and the person that you really love. So,
but the authors are saying that monogamy can lead to death or disease.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because obviously then you're not going to say anything if you're in this monogamous relationship. That's where it can be dangerous. Whereas if you're open, you can take the steps at least to do that. But it's certainly, to me, that's one of the big issues with, sleeping around, is that you would.
Well, yeah.
that you would catch something and do something to somebody that you really love, and that would be very hard to live with.
Yeah, that's true. Bruce.
Well, in the gay community, in the part of the gay community that's not monogamous, and there's a number of dating apps. On your profile, it is extremely common to put the date you were last tested for HIV and other STDs.
Mm,
It's not a real current date, that's it brings up the discussion. Also, it comes up with COVID shots, and you often you'll put COVID and then the little emoji of a hypodermic needle, and you put down how many COVID vaccinations you've had. And then also in these dating apps, you also put flu and when your flu shot was. And in the gay community, monkeypox a couple of years ago was going around, and you also put whether you had had the 2 doses of monkeypox. And so the discussion of what you're going to do often is limited by the discussion of your status when you were tested last. And there are many things you can do without risking a lot of disease, and you can agree to do the limited stuff as you're starting to disclose to each other more stuff. But when you're doing it on the sly and not in a more open situation, yeah, I think you do take risks. But I think in the gay community, a lot of people have evolved into saying, okay, let's have this discussion and let's be transparent about what's going on. And I think, if you're going to be sleeping around, that's a good concept. But that's also should be taught for high schoolers and stuff on where and how to get tested for STDs, where and how to get birth control, all these things that are so forbidden in our culture. But that honesty and transparency, well, and that's my basic, how I boil down the problems with Mormonism is they have a problem with honesty and they have a problem with transparency, and everything can be under those 2 big umbrellas. But that was just my comment.
thanks, Bruce. Rebecca?
Yeah, I think my thoughts on the theory that monogamous relationships are hazardous to male health. I don't know that I believe that, because I read studies where they say that being in a committed partnership increases longevity and is actually good for health. So I'd be on the fence on that. However, I will say that I believe that a lot of the practices of the church, or how they interfere in natural sexual behaviors, especially masturbation, is very hazardous, especially to male health. I've always wanted to, I don't know, go on a soapbox tour and talk about prostate cancer and masturbation. I'm not kidding. There's research there, there's data there, natural, healthy sexual practices. And, from a religious standpoint, stopping that or telling you there's something wrong with that, it really can affect male health. It absolutely can. Of course, I'm probably the wrong person to get on a soapbox and talk about that. So I probably need a guy. Landon, do you want to do that? Maybe you do that. But seriously, I have anecdotally, at least family members, extended family who, all into Mormonism, do not engage in any what I would consider a healthy sexual practice, and have had lifetime issues with prostate cancer and things like that. So and that's anecdotal, but I have read a lot about that. So again, why is a religion interfering in things that should be between you, yourself, your partner, your physician? I mean, stay out. It literally can be life and death in some cases.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, there's a Super Bowl issue going on in the chat.
Are they arguing?
that
Is it
I
about the
actually
puppy
started.
bowl?
Yeah, let's go back to puppies.
I would never.
Yeah. a lot less heavy than this,
know.
right?
I started it.
No, this is great. Oh gosh.
Okay, so I didn't I didn't intend for this, but it's showing up on my notes, and so there's a reason it's still in my notes. This is from a summary of the book. It talks about, let's see, I'll just read the whole thing. The breakdown, how long should I be going?
We'll probably end right around whenever you want to, but we kind of shoot for like 1, and then we usually have our mix and mingle too. We're not going to stay on just because everybody has Super Bowl stuff to do, but whenever you feel that you're finished, I mean, we probably talk for hours about this topic,
know,
and, you know, especially
We
the
probably need to
Mormonism
be-
element of it. So,
Yeah,
but
probably
whenever you
around
feel
10
you're good.
too. We have to, so,
Yeah.
because a lot of people are going to be leaving, I think, for.
Yeah,
Yep.
and if
Yeah.
anybody does happen to want to stay and talk for a few minutes, I will be around.
Oh, good. Okay,
Just,
let's say that then. Yeah, anyone that has to go,
Not
but
a full
Okay.
hour, but if anybody
Yeah.
wants to just talk for a few minutes,
yeah.
I'm
No,
gonna
that's
be-
great, Bruce. Thank you. And I'll say to the people that are joining us
Oh,
for the full
sorry.
time,
I did
first
not mean
time,
to
we
do that.
typically do at the end of the second hour, we just stay on for another half an hour, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour, just talking and getting to know each other. But just because of the circumstance today, some of us won't, but looks like Bruce is still going to stick around. So if anyone wants to stay on the meeting, you can still continue the discussion. There's so much here. So yeah, continue, Shauna. That's great. Maybe end about 10 till 5 till, and we'll do the rest of our announcements. So this is so good. Oh my gosh.
Okay, so is there more interest in discussing open discussion of sex monogamy and infidelity could benefit individuals and society, or do we want to talk about criticisms of the book?
I'd love to hear the criticism now that we're getting to the end, because I think you read this and you're like, this sounds so logical. Yes, I can see it clearly. But as we know, this book is a little bit older and there has been some new research. So we would be remiss if we didn't go into that. So yeah, I am very excited to hear you talk about, you know, as we should, weigh all sides, right? Critical thinkers. Let's talk about some criticisms.
So I have 2 quotes of criticisms about the book, and then I have my own thoughts, which I already shared, that there seem to be some leaps of logic. Sorry, my mouse. Sometimes if I bang it, it starts working. And
I always do that too.
No,
I always think banging will help. It doesn't.
not sure why. Oh, I know what's going on. Okay. I have 2 screens going. No.
I can see your bonobos. Yeah, there you go.
I know. I want to get into the bonobos so
the
bad.
bonobos. Yeah, that's something else.
Okay, so now I can read. I'm just doing it with the keyboard. There is no standard narrative of human sexual revolution. That's a criticism. There are a wide array of people who have made inferences about the evolutionary basis of sexuality, but their narratives aren't consistent, and new papers and ideas consistently jostle or replace old ones. The authors don't cite anyone else who claims a standard narrative, because this is, by the way, this is not my criticism. This is from a blogger named Jake Silliger. Because to my knowledge, no one has. Okay. The authors don't cite anyone else who claims a standard narrative, because to my knowledge, no one has. And the standard narrative they cobbled together is just that, cobbled together from a variety of sources with a variety of views. And then another blogger named Justin Lehmiller, Lehmiller, the authors attempt to discredit what they term the standard narrative of human sexual evolution, at least partly on the basis that certain research practices in psychology and anthropology have yielded inconclusive results. In some cases, they simply reinterpret findings that have traditionally been taken as support for the standard narrative without offering new or more compelling evidence for their alternative view. So the large number of the controversies, I get rid of this, seem to be that with the standard narrative. I also added that the authors reinterpret findings without offering new or more compelling evidence for their alternative view and make huge leaps of logic to come to a conclusion, which one of the leaps of logic I pointed out earlier. And then we're going to get into the bonobos, because I had a real issue with the bonobos. they're saying that human and bonobos DNA differs by only 1.6%. This is one of those leaps of logic I thought they had. And I did not look this up. When I was talking to my daughter about this, she's a psychiatric nurse practitioner. She does a lot of research and stuff. She's like, well, look up other animals and see how much our DNA differs with other animals, because all they do is say that, do we differ from, tigers by 2.1%? That's the question, is how there's no scale to judge this 1.6% by. And then they're saying that because of that, we can look to bonobos to understand human nature. And then, so let's look to bonobos. They have active and promiscuous sex lives, live in small, tight-knit communities, and females have a high status. And bonobos' lifestyle is very similar to early hunter-gatherer lifestyles, which actually we don't know exactly what hunter-gatherer lifestyles were like. You are surmising and trying to figure it out, but since it was prehistoric, we don't have any history data on that. And there you go. How do we know that? In which sex was shared among all members of the community. And then they come to, therefore, we can say that traditional and contemporary belief that humans are best suited for monogamous lifestyles is myopic, which I threw that word in there specifically for a very specific reason. But, that it's not valid, that we shouldn't be monogamous because of all of this data from bonobos. In my opinion, they spent an overly excessive amount of time talking about bonobos monkeys. It was not my favorite part of it.
Interesting, but you're right. Might not be relevant.
And I personally didn't find it interesting, which is why I kind of didn't talk about.
Do not make any AI for the bonobos. Come on, your AI is so good.
Oh, no.
That would have been frightening.
Picture of the bonobos that I was going to throw in, and I'm like, no, let's leave that out. And the whole discussion about testicle sizes. How do criticisms regarding inconsistent narratives, lack of citations, and misinterpretation of data impact the veracity of the book's hypotheses? Did you notice any other ways that the authors sought to reinterpret data to support their hypotheses? Any criticisms you got? Or thoughts about?
I didn't think the bonobos was a big jump. In fact, I think comparing to the nearest genetic relative, because we know as you evolve that only certain things change. So to me, that was a realistic comparison. It doesn't prove anything, but it certainly gives you, if your closest relative did it that way, it's more than likely what's genetically ingrained in you. I thought that was realistic. I see Jeff has his hand up and he's more scientific than me by far, so I'd be interested in his take on that, but I didn't think that was that big of a stretch or jump.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my thoughts are, I am open to hearing what other people have to say, especially somebody who's more scientific. But first, Bruce won.
Okay, so basically, as I was walking yesterday, I was listening to the part where is your scrotum half empty or half full? That will stay with me for the rest of my life. But yeah, I think a lot of research and stuff can be criticized. But when I look at the other dominant narrative put forth by, say, the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church, and relying on their honesty and their delving into how things actually work, I'm going like, okay, I've got to look someplace else besides that. And I think this book, at least pointed us towards some other ways to look at things, because the predominant I guess Judeo-Christian narrative doesn't seem to be working in my view. So that was just my comment.
I agree with you on it's not working. Jeffrey, and then I will close it out with some final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of issues with the strength of the conclusions in this kind of a book. I mean, the first problem is typically this research is not system wide. And this is something that is different across the different sciences. So if you look at physics, for example, you can typically do system-wide analyses if you're looking at cosmology or if you're trying to understand certain aspects of particle physics. But even there, they don't really have, string theory doesn't really work, so there are problems. But when you get into this biology going into social science, it's just replete with this myopic view. What ends up happening is people focus on one part of the analysis, and then they miss the bigger system-wide picture. And that leads to the second problem that I have, and that is I'm just not sure they're picking up all the confounders. I mean, Landon implied one of those before, so you see a piece of data that says monogamous men are less healthy. And then if I'm using inductive reasoning, which is probably the problem here, I could have multiple compelling explanations. So one explanation might be that something about being monogamous makes people, I think you might have mentioned, or maybe it's in the book, you drop your testosterone or your libido drops. Although I think that analysis is pretty weak. But the more likely explanation is that they are going out and sleeping with prostitutes or having affairs and then bringing illness back into the marriage and themselves. But the issue is I have the same piece I have the same set of data, but I've got multiple explanations. And I don't like it when people do inductive reasoning and then they make these strong statements in terms of how they generalize application, because often that's wrong. Often there's just some kind of a confounder underneath that's causing, it's causing the outcome that's just not being picked up. And then the other problem is just the classic, I'm sure you've all heard, correlation does not imply causation. So just because I see some correlation in data doesn't mean that I can then build this story around underlying causation. I think that these authors get a little carried away with that piece. So I mean, I just, I take what's called a Bayesian view. You pull in this information and you update your priors, and then you go somewhere else and you pull in this information. And one of the things, just my last point, because I have this debate semi-regularly with some of my believing family members, they will say things like, the scientific understanding of X, whatever it is, like sex or families or the way we structure society, it's been disproven. So the things we understood in the 70s or in the early 20th century, we don't understand. And I don't know why you think that your faith in science is better than my faith in the religion. And my response to that is the adaptation. It's like the flexibility and adaptation. So if somebody brings to me new data, a new analysis, they sort out the confounders, I'm going to change my mind. I mean, maybe I've got cognitive biases. It takes me a while to change my mind, or it's hard to see through the motivated reasoning we all have. Whereas I find the religious systems are just super brittle and very rigid. So you're still having debates about things that were written down like thousands of years ago, and you're not adapting to the new data. And the only adaptation that occurs is just mental gymnastics to kind of twist your head around interpreting some piece of advice that now makes zero sense in light of the current information. And it's not about throwing previous scientists under the bus. They did the best they could with the information they had. We can just adapt to that now. And I think that's an important point. And I like the fact that you're questioning this book, because I do find some people who leave high demand religions, it's like all of a sudden anything that XYZ scientist says, that becomes their new line of thinking. And this is something else that TBMs don't understand in the ex-Mormon, post-Mormon community. There are no prophets. There's nobody there's nobody that I'm going to 100% agree with on anything. And that's a point that I think is often missed in call it mixed faith discussions.
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. And that reminded me that another criticism that I did not include is that there's no peer review. that stuff like this should be peer reviewed, and it was not peer reviewed. So, they're just throwing out their thoughts and saying this is the way it is. Okay. So, but I want to conclude with why this matters. This is so quickly from Blinkist again. Both the key message in this book is both men and women are promiscuous by nature and evolved to have sex with many different partners. The monogamous mating system based on the nuclear family structure is culturally constructed and doesn't fit with our natural tendencies. Yet false beliefs about sexual fidelity and true love prevail and lead to frustration and even sometimes disease. And then from his TED Talk, at the end of the TED Talk, Christopher Ryan says why this matters. That's why this matters comes from. He said, this matters because our involvement in sexuality is in direct conflict with aspects of the modern world. The contradictions between what we're told we should feel and what we actually do feel generates a huge amount of unnecessary suffering. My, Christopher Ryan's, hope is that a more accurate, updated understanding of human sexuality will lead us to have greater tolerance for ourselves, for each other, and a greater respect for unconventional relationship configurations like same-sex marriage or polyamorous unions, and that will finally put to rest the idea that men have some innate instinctive right to monitor and control women's sexual behavior. So I thought that was a really good why it matters. That's all I got.
That's excellent, Shauna. Thank you so much. And thank you for being brave enough to take on this book, because it was like the last book anybody chose.
Oh my gosh, I volunteered for it before I knew what the book was. Oh, I gotta stop sharing my screen. Hold on.
No, that was excellent. No, I love it. Thank you so much. And again, this will be on our YouTube channel for the Good Book Club. And I feel like a lot of people will watch it because it brings up so many questions, which is what we're supposed to do. So this is great. Let's go to our final slides really quickly and we'll get through those. So our next book coming up in March, I've been looking forward to this one, is Devil's Gate. And Landon is going to lead this, which is always a treat. And so we're going to let him talk about Devil's Gate for March.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So our next book is Devil's Gate, Brigham Young and the Great Mormon Handcart Tragedy. I think most of us that were raised in the church, know the Willie Martin Handcart story and the devastation that happened there. But for those of us that were raised in the church, it's a story of faith. It's a story of people who don't give up on God, and it's promoted as a faith-inspiring story. Devil's Gate takes a more nuanced look at this to see what role did Brigham Young have in the tragedy? Could it have been avoided? And what's the responsibility, what responsibility did the church or the leaders have for this horrific incident where I think it was 220 people lost their lives because they crossed the prairies too late in the season with only handcarts. We recently went to Devil's Gate back in October. It was quite an amazing experience. I learned a lot of things I hadn't learned, but that I didn't know before. I didn't know there were wagon trains that were also out on the plains with them at the same time, and how they actually were near there's a little fort that they were near when the snow started falling, and when they at least one group was next to this fort. It was quite amazing when you went to Devil's Gate to see how it impacted the result. But we wanted to try to do a tour of this probably later in the season because it's Wyoming and it's cold when the wind blows. We were there in October and we were freezing to death even then. So it very well brought home how cold it could be and how miserable with that wind blowing it would be to be stuck out there. So the one thing we learned as we went, there's actually several sites, and as we went to the different sites, we kept getting told over and over and over again that Brigham Young didn't make the decision, and that Brigham Young had nothing to do with this, that the people themselves decided to go.
No.
And they said it so much, it was almost, thou dost protest too much. We started going, how come every time we go, they keep telling us Brigham Young didn't have anything to do with this decision? And I think as we read Devil's Gate, we might be able to see that Brigham Young definitely played a part in this, and his wanting to get people over as cheaply as possible probably contributed to the disaster. So Devil's Gate, get the book, read it, and next month we'll have a discussion.
Yep, this is going to be really good. And Landon's right, like unsolicited. We went to probably 3 or 4 different sites and had personal tours from people because there weren't a lot of people there in October. So we had one gentleman that would drive us around in his truck and show every single one of them. Oh, and of course, Brigham Young knew nothing. They just volunteered it, which tells me that's on their little script that they need, are encouraged to read to everybody. But yeah, fascinating. There's so much more to it than we were taught in Sunday school. That wagon train or that handcart company is the one that is used in every conference talk, right? Held up as martyrs. And there's such a backstory on why they actually left late. And that was to get Brigham Young's still and some of his other goods to Salt Lake. Oh my gosh, this book is probably one of those ones where we're going to read and throw it against the wall several times because literally nothing is as we were taught. Nothing. It's just, it's mind blowing. Anyway, that'll be March 10th. And like Landon said, we will try to get together, maybe a little trip if some people want to live out there and, just kind of a weekend or a 3-day weekend or something like that and look around because it's absolutely fascinating. Let's go to our last couple slides really quickly. Wanted to make sure everybody knows that the Good Book Club is in podcast format. You can search the Good Book Club podcast on any platform that you find your podcast on, and you can just listen at the gym if you miss some of the meetings. And there's a lot going back. Also, I described before, we are on YouTube. You can search the Good Book Club for Post-Mormons and catch up by watching with the slides and everything, all of our wonderful presentations from the past. So I encourage everyone to check that out. Also on the radar is the Good Media Club, which we curate. It's kind of just a Facebook page where we throw things that we find, series, movies, documentaries that have to do with Mormonism or cults, ironically. So if you're curious about, is there anything good coming out, anything I want to watch, you can go over there on Facebook and just scroll around and see what else is there. Also, of course, Landon and I have finished podcast, and that airs every Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time as a premiere, meaning there's a live chat where a lot of us are on there talking and chatting and have a really good time. It's kind of a party. Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and then just another episode every Friday at 4 p.m. And a lot of topics we find inspiration from book club. Like Landon and I are just texting on the side right now going, we got to cover this sex on stuff on Mormonish. I mean, it's really interesting. We get a lot of our ideas from a lot of you and from the book club, which is wonderful. So, all right. If you are for the first time and you'd like to connect or be a member of the book club, you can send an email to me at thegoodclub@mail.com, and I'll always answer. You can also just find us on Facebook. That's our logo there with the row of books. We're also on Instagram. You can just connect with us, and then you'll get links and notifications about the next book. And we chat kind of, in the month between meetings, kind of talking about the book. So it's a really wonderful group. I just appreciate everybody so much. Everybody's so dang smart. I just love our discussions and so much insight and life experience. And then you also have the opportunity, if you want to lead a book discussion like what Shauna did, which again, I have to say, so well done on this topic that, can be a little, and your AI was incredible, way better than mine. Oh my gosh, we need to chat. You did a great job. Those are legendary pictures. So very, very good. So I think we have one slide. Yes, if you email me, it sometimes goes to spam. So make sure that you check your spam folder if you have emailed me at thegoodbookclub@mail.com. And so we will end here.